Andy Peller was born in 1903 Hungary to a poor family with few prospects. As a young boy making his way in pre-First World War Europe, Andy Peller learned the discipline of hard work. He grew up in an era of subsistence living, yet reached for change with an unrelenting passion.
In the early 20s, and there was a severe economic depression in that whole area after the First World War. And after Dad finished school, there was virtually no work. Nothing was being. It's a farming community. Nothing was. Farming was pretty well at a standstill.
On Sunday afternoons, he would sometimes visit a brewery where his friend's father was a brewmaster. The place fascinated him, and he took every opportunity to ask questions. Andy's natural instinct to learn prepared him well to create a new life for his family in Canada. When his eyes first saw the port of Halifax, a great feeling came upon him. He couldn't explain it, but he knew something great was going to happen here.
He was inspired by visiting the country and by the landmass, Hungary being such a small place, there are little villages every few miles. He traveled for a couple of days and saw nothing but landmass, and he felt kind of overwhelmed by it.
Andy settled in Winnipeg, working odd jobs to save enough money to bring Lena and their son Joe to Canada. As prospects dimmed, Andy made his way back to Ontario to begin working for a brewery, a job that would provide him with a valuable experience. While life continued to be a struggle, his love affair with Canada went on unabated.
I'd heard stories from both of them of how wonderful they felt that they could be better again, that they were living in a world where Dad could find a job, enjoyed his work, and they could make a living.
He felt one of the most important things he ever did was to apply for his Canadian citizenship. The application was made in March 1932. He was in love with Canada, although he wouldn't admit it to anyone. For some time, he'd been overseeing local breweries. It was his opinion that he could set up and operate a local brewery on a much more efficient basis by changing some of the methods used. What made it more difficult for Andy was his German background during a very sensitive time in Toronto. He continued to run the plant with his usual demand for cleanliness and efficiency, but he remained true to the lessons he had learned early in life. As the Second World War broke out, Andy returned to his roots as a machinist, deciding to buy a small machine shop that produced wartime equipment and parts. But Andy couldn't stay away from the brewery business. Sensing the war coming to an end, Andy sold Peller Machine Industries and returned to his first love.
Well, then it was about that time that he got this idea to start a brewery. The idea of starting up a brewery in Hamilton, there seemed to be a good market niche for that because there'd been one there before. So again, Dad, with his tremendous mechanical ability, he literally designed the brewery himself. When you drove by the brewery, you could see these beautiful big copper brewing tanks, and made it a very, very attractive building. There wasn't anything like that anywhere in Canada. It was a brilliant design on his part and worked very well.
Once again, Andy had built a successful business from scratch and then looked ahead for new challenges.
He said, I'm starting up a newspaper in Hamilton. And I almost fainted. And I thought, my golly, he still spoke with a thick sort of Germanic accent. And although he was well read, 85% of his reading would have been in German rather than English. And the notion of being in the newspaper seemed to me, odd. But that's the way he was, and he seemed very happy about it. The fact that they didn't get the advertising support meant that it just wasn't financially viable. So that's when he closed it down.
Andy had failed. Or was it another valuable lesson? One that would prepare him for the biggest challenge of his life.
It was during that time he told me, he said, I've been doing a lot of looking around and reading, and he said, I think that there's going to be a real opportunity in the wine business in Canada. The driving visionary that he was, he said, I've heard they grow grapes in BC. He got on an airplane, flew out to Vancouver and Victoria, and came back 2 weeks later. He'd obtained a license for a winery from the BC government. I was totally boggled.
Andy learned many important lessons, but these would serve him best. understanding how to market a product and never taking no for an answer.
So in 1962, he incorporated a private company. And the name, of course, Dad, again, thinking the way he did, at that time, all wines were sold in liquor control board stores, and the wines were listed alphabetically. He came up with the idea that the company name should start with an A, and that his name was Andrew. The Hungarian for Andrew is Andres, so the company was incorporated as Andres Wines. So that was the beginning.
The winery and its excellent wines were a success, and Andres began to build wineries across Canada. It was a hectic time, the time when most people of Andy's age were thinking of retirement.
So now there were 3 wineries. My dad was living in Vancouver with his mother. He was 60 years old, and he was spending most of his time flying between Vancouver, Calgary, and Truro, Nova Scotia.
But with any grand enterprise, you can usually trace its success to one major turning point. For Andy, it was his understanding of the changing consumer trend that would bring a wave of Europeans to Canada and their appreciation of wine.
One of the things that Dad did religiously was walk through all of the plants day after day. He knew each of the employees by their first name. He was involved with every detailed step in the production of the winemaking. They took all that very seriously, and it stayed right up until today.
Machinist, brewmaster, plant manager, president, publisher, and a hard-working, committed father and husband were all important roles in life for Andy. And when all is said and done, it was more about family and tradition than it was about personal achievement. The satisfaction he felt in looking back over his accomplishments had nothing to do with material gains. Money had simply been a tool with which to achieve dreams. And in Andy's own words, it's the simple things in life that bring us the greatest joy.